Tunisia is a greater loss than Stalingrad. It absolutely isn't. But you have to see them in tandem. As this is two fronts. This is Eastern Front, Southern Western Front. And this is the first time that the Americans have been on the ground against Axis forces, and they lose big time. The Allies become masters of the North African shores on the 13th of May, 1943, and it is a catastrophe. And in that time, 2,700 Luftwaffe aircraft have been destroyed over North Africa between November 1942 and May 1943. And overall, there's subsequent that summer as well. It's really interesting. The Luftwaffe loses between June and October 1943. So this is including the Kursk battle, which takes place in July 1943. In that period, the Luftwaffe loses 702 aircraft over the Eastern Front, but 3,704 aircraft over the Mediterranean. So I think one of the lessons about studying the Second World War is one has to be careful not to assign strategic importance to boots on the ground. It can be of great strategic importance, but not necessarily. No one would argue, for example, that the Guadalcanal is not an absolutely game-changing battle in the Pacific War, and yet the number of troops compared to what's going on the Eastern Front or even the Western Front is tiny in comparison. So it is absolutely true that the most German blood is lost on the Eastern Front, but that doesn't mean to say that it's more strategically important than the Western Front. And it's not saying that the Western Front is more strategic either. It's just you have to kind of be balanced about this. The psychological blow, though, of Stalingrad is immense, and you cannot belittle that.
I mean, we went over it really fast, but there is a human drama element.
Yes.
But yes, when we're talking about the operational side, the material loss of a battle is also extremely important to the big picture of the war. And we often don't talk about that because, of course, with war, the thing to focus on is the human drama of it.
Yes.
Because we're humans.
And I also think that what's interesting is the Nazi High Command's response to Stalingrad, which is not to go, we're screwed. It's to double down. It's then so Goebbels, for example, gives his infamous speech in the Sports Palace in third week of February 1943, where he goes, "Are you ready for this? This is now total war. The war is coming. This is a fight for survival. We're all in it together. You are in this as well. Every single German is now, this is a fight for survival. And we are now in total war." And everyone is just so depressed by this. I mean, they realize that they are going to reap what they have sown. Because everyone knows what's been going on in the Eastern Front. Because first part of the war, Germans have loads and loads of cameras. They're really into photographing everything, taking cine footage of everything. It's all part of recording the greatness of the Reich and the triumphs of the Reich. They want it recorded. So all this stuff is a bit like the radios is made very, very cheap. So lots of have it. And people are sending it all back. And, the people that are developing this stuff are all seeing it and people are talking about it. And then it's being sent to families and they're all seeing it. And they're seeing pictures of Jews being rounded up and beaten. And they're seeing Ukrainian partisans being executed, and they're seeing villages being torched, and everyone knows. They all know.
Yeah.
This whole idea is, did they really know what was going on? Yeah, they do. They do know what's going on. To lesser or greater detail, of course. There's some people who don't, and a bit like people know about the news today. Some people do, some people don't. I never read the newspaper. I never listen to the news. So you have that, of course. But it is widely understood and widely known that really brutal things have been going on in the East, and troops are coming back utterly traumatized by what they have taken part in, what they have witnessed, the kind of unspeakable brutality. This is war on a completely different level to anything that's been kind of seen in recent years.
Yeah, we should mention that, the Western Front and the Eastern Front are very different in this regard.
Yes.
So a lot of the Holocaust by bullets, the Holocaust with the concentration camps and the extermination camps is not in Germany. is not in the Western Front. It's in Poland. It's in the Soviet Union.
Yeah, but don't forget that even Auschwitz, for example, is part of the new Reich. It is part of, it is part of an area which has been absorbed into Germany. So as far as they're concerned, this has now got, it's now no longer got the Polish name. It's now called Auschwitz, which is a German name. It is part of Germany. And there are German people moving there into this, air comma model town. And they all know exactly what's going on.
Yeah, you, by the way, have a nice podcast series of 4 episodes on Auschwitz, the evolution of the dream world town that becomes a camp, a work camp, then becomes an extermination camp.
And a big Buna factory for IG Farben, which never produces a single bit of rubber.
So this, for sure, is something I would have to dive deep in. There's a book you recommended, KL.
Yes, it's just called KL. It's about the whole concentration camp system, because K is Konzentration in German. Lager is a camp. It's an exhaustive book, and I'm full of admiration for him for writing it, just because, jeepers, it must have been sort of. I mean, I was very depressed doing that work on Auschwitz, that deep dive. I just found the whole thing utterly dispiriting. And I've been there a few times, and it's ghastly. So how he wrote a whole book on it, I don't know.
I think in the details, there's 2 ways, I think, to look at the Holocaust. One is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, sort of this philosophical thing about how a human being can confront that and find meaning, and what it mean. What does the human condition look like in the context of such evil?
Yeah.
And then there is the more sort of detailed, okay, well, how do you actually implement something like the final solution? So you have this ideology of evil implemented.
Yes.
And at the fine detail of what are the different technologies used, what are the different humans in the hierarchy of humans in a camp, what's the actual experience of the individual person who shows up at a camp.
Yeah.
Just get in the details, and in those details, I think there's some deep, profound human truth that can emerge. That the mundane, one step at a time, is how you can achieve evil.
Yep.
So
Yeah,
and you can get lost in the mundane.
Yes, the banality of evil. It's incredible. I think what is so completely horrific is that half the 6 million were killed by kind of bullets to the back of the head, and the reason they stopped doing that, and they wanted to stop doing that, was because the perpetrators were finding it so traumatic. Himmler goes and visits an execution in Ukraine, or maybe he's in the Baltic states. I can't remember where he goes, but he witnessed some in the summer of 1941. He thinks, oh, that's horrible. We don't have to do that. I don't want my men having to do that. We've got to find a more humane way of doing it. When he's talking about a more humane way of doing it, humane for the executioners, not for the victims, because trust me, Zyklon B is not a nice way to go. It basically it's bursting all the capillaries in your lungs. It's extremely painful, and you can no longer breathe, and it can take up to 20-25 minutes. Some people it can take a couple of minutes, but all of those who are standing naked in that gas chamber, first of all, extremely humiliated by this process in the first place. Then there's a sudden realization of that they're not having a shower, they're actually being gassed, and they're all going to die. Imagine what you're thinking as that process is, because you might be the first, but you're still going to, even the first person is going to know that I can't breathe and I'm dying. Everyone else is going to see the first few dying and then going to realize that is what's going to happen to them. And you've got those minutes, sometimes many minutes, where you've got to contemplate that. And that's in extreme pain and panic. And just think about how cruel that is.
while being humiliated all the way through.
And so the inverted commas humanity of the gas chambers is anything but. It's disgusting. And the fact that people could do this is just beyond horrific. And then the fact that you are taking your Jewish prisoners and getting them to cut off all the hair, pull out the teeth of the dead before you put them on a lift and incinerate them. If you go to Auschwitz now and you go to the blown up gas chambers, which the Germans destroyed before the Russians overran them in January 45, you can still see some of the ash ponds. And there are bits of bone there, but still there from the ash. It is utterly repulsive. And imagine arriving from that train on that incredibly long journey where you've had no comforts whatsoever. You've had humiliations and privation, the privations you've had to suffer as a result of that, having to kind of defecate in a bucket in the corner in front of other people. It's just horrendous. And then you get there bewildered and immediately your kids are taken away from you, or your, husband and wife who've been married 20 years, they're separated just like that. Sent off into different groups, straight to the gas chambers. I mean, the scale of cruelty is so immense. It's hard to fathom. And the thing that I find really difficult to reconcile, and this is where I think the warning from history is important, is that Germany is such an amazing nation. It's the country of Beethoven and Strauss and of Goethe and incredible art and culture and some of the greatest engineers and scientists have ever lived. And look how quickly it flipped into the descent of unspeakable inhumanity, which manifested itself in the Holocaust and the gas chambers, and the executions into pits and tiny places and creeks in Lithuania or Ukraine or whatever. I mean, it's just horrendous. And, this is from a nation which a decade earlier had been a democracy.
It seems like as a human civilization, we walk that Solzhenitsyn line between good and evil.
Yeah.
It's a thin line, and we have to walk it carefully.
Yes.
So one of the great battles in World War II on the Western Front is Normandy.
Yeah.
I have to talk to you about Normandy.
D-Day.
The Normandy landings, the famous on June 6, 1944. This was Allied invasion of Nazi-occupied Western Europe.
Yeah.
What was the planning? And it was lengthy planning. What was the planning? What was the execution of the Normandy landings?
Well, the decision to finally go in, when the Americans joined the war in December 1941, there's the Arcadia Conference a few days later, a week later, between the British chiefs of staff and political leaders, Churchill and Roosevelt and his own chiefs of staff, about what the policy should be. And the policy is to get American troops over to Europe as quickly as possible, get them over to Britain, get them training, and get them across the Channel ASAP, and start the liberation of Europe. But the reality is that in 1942, the Americans just aren't ready. They've gone from this incredibly tiny army, they're still growing. They've got no battlefield experience. The British are still recovering. They're good on the naval power. They're kind of increasingly good on air power. But land power, they've had to kind of make up from the loss of their ally France and expand as well. So kind of ground zero for both America and Britain has been kind of June 1940, when France is out, and suddenly that's the strategic earthquake, and that's the issue that needs settling, and they need to just completely realign everything that they'd fought in 1939. They've got to start again. But it also becomes clear that they're not really ready in 1943 either. And one of the problems is that Molotov, who is the Soviet foreign minister, has come over to Britain in May 1942 and said, we need you to kind of do your bit and get on the campaign trail against the Germans and fight on the ground. And the British sort of going, well, yeah, but cross-channel invasion is not really going to happen. We know we're doing that in North Africa at the moment. And then he goes over to Washington and And the Americans go, we are definitely going to go and take on the attack to the Germans in 1942. They've made this promise. So in the summer of 1942, it becomes clear that they can't keep that. So Churchill says, well, look, here's an idea. We've already got an army in Egypt. Why don't we land another one in Northwest Europe? Northwest Africa. That's run by Vichy France, which is pro-Axis French colonies. Why don't we take that and we can do that, and then we can meet in the middle, we can pincer around, we can conquer the whole of North Africa. You can kill with two birds with one stone because you can get some experience fighting against Axis troops, test some of your equipment and commanders, what's not to like, and then we can sort of see how it goes. So this is a kind of opportunistic strategy, whereas the Americans are very much sort of, we want to draw a straight line to Berlin, and that's the quickest way, and let's do it that way. So it's a kind of a different viewpoint. But Roosevelt kind of gets that and agrees to that. So that's where the whole North Africa Mediterranean campaign comes from. And as a consequence of the huge commitment to Tunisia, 3,500 aircraft, huge navies, two allied armies in North Africa by the time Tunisia is won in mid-May 1943. They think, well, we've got all this here. We might as well kind of really try and put the nail into the coffin of Italy's war, get them out of the battle. Sicily's an obvious one. Let's go in there, and then we can take a view. But between Sicily happening and the fall of North Africa is the Trident Conference in Washington. And that is where the decision is made. The Americans go, okay, enough of this opportunistic stuff. Let's just, okay, we get it. We buy it, but no more faffing around. May 1944, 1 year hence, we are going to cross the Atlantic. And the British go, okay, fair cop, we'll do that. So that is where Operation Overlord, as it gets given its code name, its operational name. That's when the planning starts. Serious planning starts at the beginning of 1944. And one of the lessons from Sicily to Normandy is that you can't have commanders fighting one battle whilst preparing for the next one. So you have to have a separate command structure. And that's okay, because by this time we've got enough people that have got experience of battlefield command that you can actually split it. There are very good reasons for going into Italy, not least getting the Foggia airfields, so that you can further tighten the noose around Nazi Germany. And one of the great prerequisites for the Normandy invasion is total control of the airspace, not just over Normandy, but over a large swathe of Northwest Europe. Why is that? Because the moment you land in Normandy, the cat is out of the bag. And it's then a race between which side can build up men and material quickest. Is it going to be the Allies who've got to come from southern England, which is a distance of a slow journey across seas and a distance between kind of 80 and 130 miles away? Or is it going to be the Germans that are already on the continent? Well, clearly on paper, it's the Germans. So you have to slow up the Germans. Well, how do you do that? Well, you do that by destroying their means of getting there. So bridges, destroy all the bridges over the Seine, destroy all the bridges over the Loire, hit the marshalling yards. The glue that keeps the German war machine together is the Reichsbahn, the German railway network. So destroy the railway as much as you possibly can and make it difficult for the Germans to reinforce the Normandy bridgehead as and when it comes. But the way you do that in turn is by very low-level precision bombing, and that has to be done by twin-engine, faster, smaller bombers going in low. But the problem is you can't go low and destroy those bridges if you've got Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts hovering above you. So you've got to destroy those, which is why you need to have air superiority over this large swathe of Northwest Europe to do that. The problem is that while the industrial heartland of Nazi Germany is in the west, is in the Ruhr area, which is very convenient for bombers coming out of Lincolnshire or East Anglia on the flat east side of Great Britain. The aircraft industry is much deeper into the Reich, and it is beyond the range of fighter escorts for the bombers. And the American daylight bombers who are going over are discovering that despite being called flying fortresses, they're not fortresses. They're actually getting decimated. And whenever their bombers go in strength over to try and hit the aircraft industry in Germany, beyond fighter range, they get decimated. First, infamously on the Schweinfurt-Regenburg raid on the 17th of August 1943, coincidentally the same day that Sicily falls to the Allies, and also coincidentally the same day that face-to-face negotiations begin with the Italians for an armistice in Lisbon. But on that day, of the 324 heavy bombers that the Americans send over to hit Schweinfurt and Regensburg, where there are a Messerschmitt plant and also a ball bearing plant, which is essential for aircraft manufacturing, they lose 60 shot down and a further 130 odd really, really badly damaged. And even for the vast numbers of manpower and bombers that are coming out of America, this is too much. So they can't sustain it. So they've got to find a fighter escort that's going to be able to escort them all the way into the Reich. And the race is on, because basically if they haven't got one airspace by April 1944, it's game over. You can't do a cross-channel invasion. You have to have that control of the airspace beforehand. So the race is on. Unfortunately, they come up with a solution, which is the P-51 Mustang, which has originally been commissioned in May 1940 by the British, developed from sketches to reality in 117 days. It's a work of absolute genius. But start off, it's harnessed with a really bad engine. The Allison engine is just not right for that aircraft. And it's not until a Rolls-Royce Merlin, which is the same one that powers the Lancaster, the Mosquito, and the Spitfire and Hurricane, is put into the P-51 Mustang, that suddenly you've got your solution, because that means it can now fly with extra drop tanks and fuel tanks. It can it's so aerodynamic, and it's so good. The higher it goes with this engine, the more fuel efficient it becomes. It can actually fly over 1,400 miles, which gets you not just to Berlin and back, but to Warsaw and back. So suddenly you've got that solution. And actually by April 1944 they have cleared airspace, and by the end of May 1944, just on the eve of the invasion, Operation Overlord, the closest German aircraft that is seen fighting Allied aircraft is 500 miles from the beachhead. Wow. So it is absolutely job done. Meanwhile, comparatively new ground attack fighter planes like Typhoons and Tempests and adapted P-47 Thunderbolts are attacking the German radar stations all along the coastline, because they now do have an air defense system. They're destroying kind of 90% of their effectiveness. And in the intelligence game, they're winning that one as well. They're just much better, because in Germany, intelligence is power. So people tend to, and Hitler always has this kind of divide and rule thing going on. So you have parallel command structures, which is not conducive to bringing together of intelligence. And while much play has been made about the successes of Bletchley and code breaking and all the rest of it, actually, what you have to do is you have to see the kind of the decrypts that the Bletchley cryptanalysts do as just a cog, and those various cogs together, from listening services to photo reconnaissance to agents on the ground to also the cogs collectively add up to more than some of their individual parts. And so the intelligence picture is a broad picture rather than just code breaking. But anyway, they win that particular battle as well. And what you see really with D-Day is the zenith of coalition warfare. What you've got multiple nations who have different overall aims, different cultures, different attitudes, different start points, but they have all coalesced into one common goal. Mm-hmm. And until they've achieved that common goal, they're going to put differences to one side. Much play has been made about kind of Anglophobia amongst American commanders and Americophobia amongst Allied, British commanders. But actually, it's nothing. It's a marriage made in heaven compared to the way Germany looks after its own allies, for example. And what is remarkable about the allies is they're not actually allies; they're coalition partners. So there's no formal alliance at all. And there is a subtle difference there. But what you see them really, really pulling together. And you see that manifest itself on D-Day, I think, where you've got, 6,939 vessels, of which there are 1,213 warships, 4,127 assault craft, 12,500 aircraft, 155,000 men landed and dropped from the air in 24-hour period. It is phenomenal. It is absolutely phenomenal. And while it is still seen as a predominantly American show, all three service commanders are British. It is most of the aircraft are. 2/3 of the aircraft are British. 2/3 of the men landed are British and Dominion. You never forget the Canadians, who consistently punch massively above their weight in the Second World War, in all aspects, it has to be said, air, land, and sea. They're key in the Battle of the Atlantic. They're key in air power. They're key at D-Day and indeed in the Battle for Italy as well. So the Canadians should never be forgotten. But one of the reasons it is is the British Navy that dominates in D-Day is because, of course, the incredibly enormous strength of the Royal Navy in the first place, but partly because most of the US Navy is by this stage in the Pacific, fighting its own fight. So it's not slacking by any stretch of the imagination. It is because it's elsewhere doing its bit for the kind of overall Allied cause. But D-Day is just extraordinary, and despite the terrible weather, which is such a debilitating factor in the whole thing. I mean, it puts people off course, means many more people get killed on Omaha Beach than they might have done, and on other beaches besides, incidentally. And actually, in terms of lives lost, proportionally, it is the Canadians that suffer the worst, more so than the Americans. It's just there's fewer of them overall. D-Day has to be seen as an unqualified success. I mean, it is absolutely extraordinary what they achieve. And while they don't 100% achieve their overall D-Day objectives, the objectives are always going to be the outer reach of what can be achieved. And you'd need absolutely perfect conditions for that to happen, and they don't get perfect conditions, but they're so balanced, they're so thought of absolutely everything, and their logistic supply, and I mean, even things like the minesweeping operation is the biggest single minesweeping operation of the entire war, because there's huge minefields off the Normandy coast, and ahead of the invasion force, the minesweepers, which amount to, I think, something like 242 different minesweepers in 5 different operations opposite every single beach, creating lanes through these minefields through which the invasion force can go. Not a single ship is lost to a mine in the actual invasion. That is phenomenal, and can only be done with the greatest of skill and planning, and all in a period where there are no computers, there's no GPS, there's nothing. I mean, it is absolutely astonishing, and the scale of it is just frankly mind-boggling.
Yeah, and that was really the nail in the coffin, the beginning of the end.
Yeah.
For Hitler, for the European theater.
Yeah. Once you get the only cause for doubt is, will they be able to secure that bridgehead? The moment they get that bridgehead, it is game over. There's only, there is no other way it's going to be, because of the overwhelming amount of men and material that the Allies have compared to the Germans at this stage of the war. And of course, you're being attacked on 3 fronts, because there's the Italian front to the south, and of course, in a very major way, you've also got the Eastern Front. And Operation Bagration, which is launched that summer as well, is enormous.
So let's go to the very end, the Battle of Berlin.
Yeah.
Hitler sitting in his bunker, his suicide, Germany's surrender. You actually said that Downfall, the movie, was a very accurate representation.
I think it is, really. Except that Goebbels took cyanide and shoot himself.
Oh, details. But I think it might be my favorite World War II movie, which is strange to say because it's not really about World War II. It's about Hitler in a bunker, but
I think, what was his name? Bruno Ganz, wasn't it? I think he nailed him.
yeah.
There's so many accounts of that. There's so much written about Hitler. There's millions and millions of Hitler's words that you can read. There are translations of many of his conferences. You can see what he's saying. You can get inside his head in a very clear way, and much more clearly than you can Stalin or just about any other leader, really. And so one has a very, very strong impression of what Hitler was like in the bunker in those last days. There's so many accounts of it. And it just feels like they nailed it. It just feels like they've got it spot on to me.
I mean, it's a fascinating story of evil maniac, and this certainty, crumbling, right? Like realizing that this vision of the 1,000-year Reich is.
And Hitler says, my reputation won't be good to start off with, but I hope in a few years' time that people will start to realize the kind of all the good I was trying to bring.
Yeah.
I mean, that sort of.
They're all the same, aren't they? You always believe you're doing good.
Yeah.
And there's so many deep lessons there. So now you have written so much, you have said so much, you have studied this so much. What, to you, looking at World War II, is the lessons we should take away?
Well, I suppose it's what happens when you allow these individuals to take hold of great power and great authority and make these terrible decisions. If you allow that to happen, there are consequences, and you have to recognize the moments of trouble when they arise. So when there are financial crises, you know that political unrest is going to come, and you need to be prepared for that. You need to be able to see the writing on the wall. You can't be complacent. Complacency is such a dirty word, isn't it? You've got to keep your wits, and you can't take things for granted. You've got to recognize, I think, that the freedoms we enjoy in the West are, they're not necessarily permanent, and you need to make the most of them while you've got them and cherish them and consider what happens if the milk turns sour and what the consequences of that are. I mean, that's the overriding thing, because although I don't think there'll ever be a war on the scale of the Second World War, you've only got to look at pictures of those opening days of the war in Ukraine and see sort of knocked out Russian tanks and dead bodies, bloated bodies all over the place, put that into black and white, and, it could be the road out of Falaise in 1944. It could be, any number of German battlefields and in World War II, and the similarities and the trenches and the kind of people hiding in foxholes, and that's horribly reminiscent, as are the huge casualties that they're suffering on both sides, whether they be Russian or Ukrainian. And it's a shock. It's a shock to see that, and it reminds you of just how quickly I think things can descend. I mean, that's the other thing. That point I was making about how quickly Germany descended from this amazing nation of arts and culture and science and development and engineering into one of the Holocaust. I mean, life is fragile and peace is fragile. And, it's, you take it for granted at your peril.
And you take for granted at our peril that nobody will use nuclear weapons ever again. And that's not a thing we should take for granted.
No, sir.
What gives you hope about the future of human civilization? We've been talking about all of this darkness in the 20th century. What's the source of light?
The source of light is that I think the vast majority of people are good people who want to live peacefully and want to live happily and are not filled with hate. And there are some brilliant minds out there. And I think the capacity for the human brain to come up with new developments and new answers to problems and challenges is infinite. And I think that's what gives me hope.
James, this is I'm a big fan. This was an honor to talk to you, and please keep putting incredible history out there. I can't wait to see what you do next. Thank you so much for talking today.
Well, thank you, Lex. It's been an utter privilege to talk to you.
Thanks for listening to this conversation with James Holland. To support this podcast, please check out our sponsors in the description or at lexfreeman.com/sponsors. And now, let me leave you with some words from Winston Churchill. If you're going through hell, keep going. Thank you for listening, and hope to see you next time.